Namaste, and welcome to our continuing series on the life divine with our beloved Ranga. We are currently in the chapter, The Origin of the Ignorance, and we're on page 595. The last paragraph is a long one, and Ranga read it last week, but we're going to go through it line by line. The reality then is neither an eternal passivity.
So, let's just keep in mind a few important ideas. The chapter is the origin of the ignorance. So, Srendra is trying to find out where is the ignorance coming. We are starting from the Advaita philosophy, which says that there is only one reality. And if that reality is one and it is perfect, how can there be ignorance in it? It's not possible. And yet we see that it is there. There is ignorance in the physical world. So, how is that coming? That's what he is examining. So, he notes that in the physical world, there is movement all the time. There is constant movement. Now, movement is something that distracts your concentration. Is that not true? See, I'll put it in this way. Now you are looking at me, but I take even my hand and I do this. You don't see me as clearly as you would if I don't do this. So this movement is distracting your attention and you are not being able to see my face properly. Now suppose I increase this speed much more and I make it absolutely 10 times, say 1,000,000 times I move it, it will become a screen for you not to see me. So movement in the physical world causes ignorance. So when you are in the physical world, you don't think you are in ignorance, but constant movement is making you not see the reality because of the movement. Movement of your consciousness, movement of your vital, even movement of the body. Okay? Even if you think you are not moving, everything inside your body is moving. Movement is the basic principle of level 1 in the ignorance, in the physical world.
When one is in meditation?
Even then, you are trying to get away from movement.
Yes.
When you are meditating, you are trying to get away from movement. That's exactly the point. So when your meditation is successful, your consciousness goes to the level 2 of the spiritual planes of consciousness, and there you see that there is no movement. So you get knowledge to a certain extent. Knowledge as compared to the physical world's ignorance. So now the question is, which is the reality? Is that static condition the real, or is it movement the real? That's what Srendra is now going to discuss in this paragraph. Okay? So when there is no movement, there is clarity of vision. And when there is movement, the clarity becomes less. Okay? And sometimes that's why ignorance and static condition, dynamic condition. So, with this background, we start reading the para which we read last time, but we will go sentence by sentence. The reality then is neither an eternal passivity of immobile being nor an eternal activity of being in movement. Okay. Now the question was, there is movement and there is static condition. In the physical world we saw that they are there, both are there, like in the clock. Static movement, static movement, static movement. So, is it like that or what is it? That's what he is discussing. Okay? So, nor is it an alternation in time between these two things. So, is it that? Is the reality an alternation? As I said in the clock, static, dynamic, static, dynamic. Is the reality including both in this sense that they are alternating with each other? That's what he is asking. Okay, so it's interesting. We'll go a little more into this because it is so interesting. Okay, so in the clock, there is static, and after 1 second, it moves to the next one. Suppose that movement takes place not in 1 second, but half a second. Then what's happening? The alternation is becoming shorter.
Yes.
Okay? Now instead of half a second, let me make it quarter second. 1/1,000,000th of a second. Infinite second. So what's happening? Together there is static condition and movement. Static condition and movement.
Simultaneously?
Pardon?
Simultaneously?
Yes. If the gap between
Yeah.
static and becomes less, it becomes simultaneous. That is exactly what the Advaita says about the physical world. Brahman is creating instantaneously, not alternatively. Instantaneously, Rudra, Shiva is destroying and Vishnu is preserving. That's why you see a continuous movement. Okay? So, Siddhartha is asking, what is this reality? Is it static or is it passive? Or is it that, like the clock, both are real but with an alternation? Is it an alternation? The reality then is neither an eternal passivity of immobile being, nor an eternal activity of being of movement, nor is it an alternation in time between these two things. So what is it? Neither is in fact the sole absolute truth of Brahman's reality. So the solution is that you have to go to another level of consciousness where that is the reality and passivity and activity are only results. They are movements and activity outside this time and space. Outside time and space is a reality. Okay? So that's what he's saying. Neither in fact is the sole absolute truth of Brahman's reality. Their opposition is only true of it in relation to the activities of its consciousness. Okay? Depends at which level of consciousness you are. The consciousness can be in the static, it can be in the dynamic. But it can also be in a condition, third level, where both are there together and there is no contradiction between them. In the lower planes, there is a contradiction between movement and static condition. Silence and noise, silence and movement. So that's what he is aiming at slowly.
Now he capitalizes it.
Yes, the reality.
Which is the reality.
Yeah, that's why okay, so of its consciousness, the consciousness of the reality.
Mm-hmm.
When we perceive its deployment of the conscious energy of its being in the universal action, we speak of it as a mobile active Brahman. The divine is becoming movement here. It is a mobile active Brahman. When we perceive its simultaneous reservation of its conscious energy of its being, reservation, it is not acting, it is reserving the action. Its simultaneous reservation of its conscious energy of its being, kept back from the action, we speak of it as the immobile passive Brahman. Saguna, Nirguna. Saguna with qualities, with many, but Nirguna without any qualities, only one. So the Saguna is the many and the Nirguna is the one. Okay? So there are different words also, Kshara and Akshara. These two words are from the Gita. The Kshara is the one in which there is movement and the Akshara is the one when there is no movement. Okay, so otherwise the terms would have no meaning, for there is one reality and not two independent realities. There are philosophies which say there are two independent realities. Sankhya philosophy, the dualism. Okay, all these say that no, there are two fundamental different realities. The one and the many are different. The movement and the non-movement are two different things altogether.
Sri Aurobindo doesn't agree.
No, because he subscribes to the Vedantic Advaita theory. The Advaita, there is only one ultimate reality. If anything else is there, they are results of its movement. They are results, expressions of its movement. Okay? Saguna, Nirguna, Kshara, Akshara. Otherwise, the terms would have no meaning. For there is one reality and not two independent realities. One immobile, the other mobile. In the ordinary view of the soul's evolution in the action, pravritti, and its involution into the passivity, nivritti, it is supposed that in the action, the individual soul becomes ignorant. Now, Srimad uses the word, it is supposed.
Yes.
Normally, that's what you would say. We saw that a movement gives you ignorance, but it's only a surface phenomena. Even in the movement, the soul need not be in ignorance. That's what he's pointing out. In yoga, when you make your consciousness go to the static condition of the self, you are not in the movement, your consciousness has gone up here. And that is the reason why the Buddhists and the Mayavadins say the reality is there, not here, it can never be here. Now Srimad is contradicting that. He is saying that the soul can be in knowledge, not in ignorance, even here in the movement. That's what he's saying. Okay? So the others are saying, no, that's not possible. The moment you are here, the movement will give you ignorance. So,
so even if the Buddhist goes into deep, deep meditation.
Yes, because they want to go to the static condition,
Right.
where there is only knowledge, where there is only oneness.
But on earth, in that deep meditation,
Yeah, that's a transition. When you are meditating,
Okay.
you are trying to get out of your action and going into non-action.
yes,
And once you go into non-action, this seems to be unreal, you reject it. But the Gita and Srimad are not rejecting. They are saying this is only an apparent phenomena. You, the soul, with its consciousness of knowledge, oneness, can come down into the physical world, occupy the body, but need not be subject to sattva, rajas, tamas, need not be subject to ignorance. It can remain in the body with its consciousness in the infinite, in the finite, in the static condition.
which is Mother and Sri Aurobindo.
According to us.
According to
the
us.
others, something else.
Yes, yes. Okay.
Okay. So, nivritti. It is supposed that in the action, the individual soul becomes ignorant, nascent of its passive, which is supposed to be its true being. So, they say that when you are in your body-mind life, you feel that you have forgotten your true being. When you go there, this seems unreal. When you are here, the soul seems unreal. Okay? So they are saying that that's not necessary. Okay? So, which is supposed to be its true being. And in the passivity, it becomes finally nascent of its active, which is supposed to be its false or only apparent being. This is the Mayavada theory. Even the Vedanta has that idea that this is, Shankara comes in and gives a little bit of a modification and says that the world is not unreal, it is not illusion, but it is reality in time and space, whereas the true reality is outside time and space. So if you want the divine, you have to go there. You can't get it here fully. But Srimad says it is possible here also. It is rare and difficult, but it's possible. That's the difference. Okay, so. But this is because these two movements take place alternately in us. Movement, static, movement, static. So. But this is because these two movements take place alternately in us, as in our sleep and waking. We pass in waking into nations of our sleeping condition, in sleep into nations of our waking condition. If you are there, this is unreal. If you are here, that is unreal. So what's the solution? Go to a level of consciousness above these two, where both are real to you. That's a supermind, or the Purushottama in the Gita. Okay, so, but this happens because only part of our being performs this alternative movement, and we falsely think of ourselves as only that partial existence. We identify ourselves with that partial existence. But we can discover by a deeper psychological experience that the larger being in us is perfectly aware of all that happens, even in what is to our partial and superficial being a state of unconsciousness. So it's possible to be here and yet be fully in knowledge, fully aware of the One. That's what he's saying.
But most of the world would not feel that.
No. Most of them are in ignorance,
Yes.
and even the yogis who have experienced the self, they also feel that there is a difference between the two. Okay? A deeper psychological experience than the larger being in us is perfectly aware. He is referring here to the supramental, where all the contraries are harmonized. This also is something which we have spoken of before, but we will again speak about it a little more. Okay? When you are in the physical world, there is a difference between kindness and cruelty. They are opposites. Sin and virtue, they are opposites. And that's valid for you, they are opposites. But when you go to a higher level of consciousness, your view changes, and you see that sin and virtue are not opposites, but they are gradations of one movement. The best example of this is again and again, we come back to that same example of the wind which is in movement. The wind which is very, very pleasant, gentle, you like it and you say this is good. But when that same wind becomes violent and comes at 200 kilometers an hour, you think it is bad, it destroys. So your view here, you are seeing the two as different. But when you go to the higher level, you are not seeing the slow movement and the fast movement, you are seeing only wind. You see oneness. You don't see the So that is what is, when you see that, you go to the higher level, you see the oneness of things and not the opposites, not dualities. Okay? So, of all that happens here in what is our partial and superficial being, a state of unconsciousness. It is limited neither by sleep nor by waking. When you go to the third level of the supermind, you can enter into a consciousness where both are real and both are really the same, movement as well as non-movement. As I told you, the gap between movement and not movement, if they become one, they are the same. And that's exactly what the world is. Okay, so so it is in our relations with Brahman, who is our real and integral being. Okay? In the ignorance, we identify ourselves with only a partial consciousness, mental or spiritual mental in its nature, which becomes nascent of itself of status by movement. Okay? In this part of us, when we lose the movement, we lose at the same time our hold on the self of action by entering into passivity. So when you are here, you don't see that, and when you are there, you don't see this. Okay? So in this part of the, we lose at the same time a hold on the self of action by entering into passivity. By an entire passivity, the mind falls asleep or enters into trance, or else is liberated into a spiritual silence. So, by an entire passivity, the mind falls asleep, okay? There is no more thinking, or enters into trance, or else is liberated into a spiritual silence. All these different experiences are possible. But though it's a liberation from the ignorance of the partial being in its flux of action, it is earned by putting on a luminous nescience of the dynamic reality or a luminous separation from it. So, Senda is saying that level 1 is ignorance, level 2 is knowledge, but that also, spiritually speaking, is also an ignorance, because you are not aware of both. You have to be aware of both. If you are aware of both, that is true spiritual consciousness. That's what he's saying. Okay, sir.
And that only takes place beyond the overmind.
Yes. Because up to the overmind level, you are seeing two different things. Purusha and Prakriti, consciousness and force, are two separate things. But when you go there, you see that they are really one. Okay? It is earned by putting on a luminous nescience. Look at the words, luminous nescience. Yes. Okay? Even the ignorance is really knowledge, he is saying. It is knowledge which has reduced itself, diminished itself and become ignorance. Knowledge has the power to reduce itself, to make itself smaller. That's what he is saying. Ignorance is not true not knowing. It is not a true not knowing. It's a purposeful reduction of one's own consciousness so that this is a state of your own consciousness. Okay, so by an entire, we read that, I'll read it again. By an entire passivity, the mind falls silent or enters into trance or else is liberated into a spiritual silence. But though it's a liberation from the ignorance of the partial being in its flux of action, it is earned by putting on a luminous nescience of the dynamic reality or a luminous separation from it. Okay? So, the spiritual mental being remains self-absorbed in a silent essential status of existence and becomes either incapable of active consciousness or repugnant to all activity. When you go there, you don't like this. This is wonderful, so calm, peaceful, freedom. Why should I have anything to do with that? There is a rejection normally. Okay. Repugnant to all activity. This release of silence is a status through which the soul passes in its journey towards the absolute. So these are stages, and the journey will end in the absolute. Okay? But there is a greater fulfillment of our true and integral being, in which both the static and the dynamic sides of ourself are liberated and fulfilled in that which upholds both and is limited neither by action nor by silence. That's a supermental. So very clearly he is saying level 1 of the physical world is a state of consciousness. It's a purposely induced ignorance. The divine has plunged himself purposely into the opposite of himself. And now when the soul, individual soul not satisfied with this, goes there, it's a status where you are now seeing the opposite of that. But neither this nor this is the absolute truth. The absolute truth is one which tells you that activity and passivity are only two aspects of the reality.
So this word luminous is very important.
Yes. That's what he means by ignorance is the purposeful, conscious reduction of knowledge to limit itself. Okay, sir.
Good.
In other words, he is saying that ignorance is not the opposite of the divine. It is the divine himself who takes that status and comes down here on purpose. And what is that purpose? The adventure of consciousness. I want to get out of darkness into the infinite. Okay. So that is the, and you can see a reflection of that here explained also elsewhere, that this urge is there in man. Whenever there is a difficulty, you have to conquer it. Whenever there is something unknown, you have to know it. If there is a Himalaya, a Mount Everest, I must know what it is, I must climb to it. If there is an ocean deep enough, I must go to the bottom and see what it is. This is the urge in man. And that is coming from where? It is coming from the divine, who is playing this game of hiding himself in the darkness and coming out of it. It's not a pretension, it's a real thing. Okay. So.
Thank you. Shall we take up the next para?
Yes, I think so. For Brahman does not pass alternately from passivity to activity and back to passivity by cessation of its dynamic force of being. If that were really true of the integral reality, then while the universe continued, there would be no passive Brahman in existence. All would be action. And if our universe were dissolved, there would be no active Brahman. All would become cessation and immobile stillness. But this is not so, for we can become aware of an eternal passivity and self-concentrated calm, penetrating and upholding all the cosmic activity and all its multiplicity, concentrated movement. And this could not be if, so long as any activity continued, the concentrated passivity did not exist supporting it and within it. I'll finish the para, we'll come back to it. Integral Brahman possesses both the passivity and the activity simultaneously and does not pass alternately from one to the other as from a sleep to a waking. It is only some partial activity in us which seems to do this, to do that. And we, by identifying ourselves with that partial activity, have the appearance of this alternation from one nations to another nations. That also is nations. Spiritual consciousness also is nations. But our integral being is not subject to these opposites, and it does not need to become unaware of its dynamic self in order to possess itself of silence. So, when you go to the self, it is not necessarily a condition that the world becomes an illusion. It is not so. Okay? So, when we get the integral knowledge and the integral liberation of both soul and nature, free from the disabilities of the restricted, partial and ignorant being, we too can possess the passivity and activity with a simultaneous possession exceeding both these poles of the universality, limited by neither of these powers of the self in relation or non-relation to nature. Now, this last thing is very interesting, we will have a look at it. When we get the integral knowledge and the integral liberation of both soul and nature, okay, so what is this? When we are in the physical world, our normal condition, we are in ignorance. We don't know that actually nature is pushing us to think, to emote and to act physically. We don't know. But when you go to the self, the physical world seems to be unreal. Okay? So, what he is saying is, when we get the integral knowledge, when you are in the spiritual plane of consciousness, the physical world is, your body, mind, life is still in ignorance. Your soul is free, so you have gone there. But nature, your body, mind, life is still subject to nature's laws. So you are a slave, your body, mind, life is still a slave. So Srinath is saying, the soul must become free, but the nature also must become free. That's exactly what he is saying. The liberation of the soul, in the synthesis you have 2 chapters. The liberation of the soul. That's what all yogas do. And they reject the body, mind, life. But Srinath is saying, without rejecting body, mind, life, that also should become free. And when can it become free? Normally your mind can become free, even here now, your vital also can become free, but the body is still subject to the law of disease and death. So when will that be? The supramental race will have a body which is not subject to disease and death. That would be the true fulfillment.
So now, Mother was working for those 23 years on the physical body itself.
Exactly.
On the cells.
That's right. That's what she was doing. Okay? But the work is so difficult that she has gone a great distance into that work, but the work has not been completed yet. It will be completed in future when the supramental body will be seen and will be a reality in the physical world. That's what he's saying. Liberation of soul, fine. Many people have done it. But he wants liberation of body, mind, life also. He wants liberation of nature. That's what he's pointing out here. Okay. When we get the integral knowledge and the integral liberation of both soul and nature, free from the disabilities of the restricted, partial and ignorant being. What are the disabilities? The disability is ignorance. Disability is death, disease, disabilities. The vital has wrong movements. The mind does not see the reality. All the other disabilities. So this also must go. Okay. So we too can possess the passivity and activity with a simultaneous possession, exceeding both these poles of the universality, limited by neither of these powers of the self in relation or non-relation to nature. So he is putting it in different words, but what he means is a day will come when even the nature can be free even here. Your body, mind, life also will be free. It will not be subject to any law, neither physical laws, nor vital laws, nor mental laws. It will be completely free. And that's the supramental race. The Supreme, it has been declared in the Gita, exceeds both the immobile self and the mobile being. Even put together, they do not represent all he is. So, he now brought in the concept of the third level, which he spoke of earlier, as that which combines both, the Supreme, and he is talking about it as he, a personality. Because in the Gita, he referred to the Gita, the Uttama Purusha, the supramental. In Shrevda's view, the supramental can be impersonal as well as personal. In Shrevda's yoga, impersonal as well as personal. But in the Gita, it is the Uttama Purusha, a conscious being. Okay, so even put together, they do not represent all he is. For obviously, we do not mean, when we speak of his possessing them simultaneously, that he is the sum of a passivity and an activity. An integer made up of these two fractions, passive with 3/4 of himself, active with 1/4 of his existence. So, the 3/4 of his existence is the reality of the spiritual planes. The active is 1/4 here, it is less real than the spiritual planes. So, that's very clearly indicating. It is much better for normal man to be in the spiritual planes than to be here. But if you want to include this also, go to the third level. Okay, so with 3/4 of himself, active with 1/4 of his existence. In that case, Brahman might be a sum of nescences. Okay, the nescence of the physical world, the nescence of the spiritual world. The passive 3/4, not only indifferent to, but quite ignorant of all that the activity is doing. The active 1/4, quite unaware of the passivity and unable to possess it except by ceasing from action. Okay? Even Brahman, the sum, the Brahman, the sum, might amount to something quite different from his two fractions. Something, as it were, up and aloof, ignorant and irresponsible for anything which some mystic Maya was at once obstinately doing and rigidly abstaining from doing in the two fractions of his existence. But it is clear that Brahman, the Supreme Being, must be aware both of the passivity and the activity and regard them not as his absolute being, but as opposite, yet mutually satisfying terms of his universalities. So, in this Supreme, when you are there, activity and passivity are aspects of his being. That's what he's saying. It cannot be true that Brahman, by an eternal passivity, is unaware, entirely separated from his own activities. Free, he contains them in himself, supports them with his eternal power of calm, initiates them from his eternal poise of energy. So, it is he who does both. That's what it is. It must be equally untrue that Brahman in his activity is unaware of or separated from his passivity. Omnipresent, he is there supporting the action, possessing it always in the heart of the movement, and is eternally calm and still and free and blissful in all the whirl of its energies. What his meaning is that even in the movement, the passivity is there in the background. Even in the passivity, the movement is there in the background. Or, if you use different words, consciousness seems to be lacking in matter. Only movement, Shakti is there. Shakti is there, but Chit is there in the background. At the level of the spiritual planes of consciousness is full, but does not mean to say that Shakti is not there. It is there, held back, just like the water in the dam. That is a perfect example. The water in the dam is static, but you can make it very, very active by just punching a hole in the dam, the water gushes out. So, this is the nature of the Brahman. He contains both in himself. When he is here, he is holding back the consciousness. When he is there, he is holding back the force. And when he is there, he possesses both at the highest level. Okay? So, in the heart of movement, eternal calm and still blissful. Nor in either silence or action can he be at all unaware of his absolute being. The individual can be unaware, but not the divine. Okay? Nor in either silence or action can he be at all unaware of his absolute being, but knows that all he expresses through them draws its value and power from the power of that absolute existence. The absolute existence includes both. If it seems otherwise to our experience, it is because we identify with one aspect and by that exclusiveness fail to open ourselves to the integral reality. But it's possible to do that, very difficult, but possible. It's difficult enough to go to the spiritual planes of consciousness. But that is even more difficult, but it is possible. There necessarily follows an important first result, already arrived at from other viewpoints, that the ignorance cannot have the origin of its existence or the starting point of its dividing activities in the absolute Brahman or in integral Satchidananda. So now he comes back to the theme of the chapter, where is the origin coming from? Okay. So he is saying what we have seen, it cannot be in the Brahman. When you are in the Brahman consciousness, ignorance is not possible, because it includes both. Okay, so or in the integral Satchidananda. It belongs only to a partial action of the being with which we identify ourselves, just as in the body we identify ourselves with that partial and superficial consciousness which alternates between sleep and waking. It is indeed this identification, putting aside all the rest of the reality behind us, that is the constituting cause of the ignorance. So, from the highest level, we are slowly limiting our consciousness, limiting ourselves, and that is the cause of the ignorance. A purposeful descent into darkness. It's purposeful. It's not. So the ignorance is not, it is caused by the divine will. That is the. So ignorance is a way of speaking. Ignorance is, by definition you can say, it's a condition where the divine has decided to see only one side of himself. And when you go to spiritual planes, he has decided to see another side of himself. But when you go to the third level, then you see both. Okay, so which alternately. It is indeed this identification, putting aside all the rest of the reality behind us, that is the constituting cause of the ignorance. And if ignorance is not an element or power proper to the absolute nature of the Brahman or to its integrality, there can be no original or primal ignorance. So, in the Brahman, there is no ignorance is not fundamental, it's a result. Okay. Now, in another chapter, the title of the chapter is Exclusive Concentration. That is the cause of the ignorance. When a mechanic is trying to repair let's say a motorcycle or a car, he is concentrating fully on that job. It's an exclusive concentration, forgetting that he has a brother at home, he has a mother who is sick in hospital, he has forgotten that he lives in such and such a place. Okay? He forgets all these things. He forgets what he is wearing also. So the exclusive concentration, that is the cause of ignorance. So when
forgets or puts aside.
That's what Srila is saying. He puts aside all these things. Then that is ignorance. So in other words, it is a divine, purposeful divine action to exclude everything else except movement here, exclude everything else except static condition, and then finally you go to the third level where there is no ignorance at all. So ignorance is not negative in Sri view. It's not negative. It's an induced state of consciousness. And if ignorance is not an element or power proper to the absolute nature of the Brahman or to its integrality, there can be no original or primal ignorance. Ignorance, unconsciousness cannot be there in the Brahman. That's what he's saying. Okay, so note the word original and primal. They are there as a result, but not in the origin. In the origin, they are not there. Okay, so Maya, if it be an original power of the consciousness of the eternal, cannot itself be an ignorance or in any way akin to the nature of ignorance, but must be a transcendent and universal power of self-knowledge and all knowledge. Ignorance can only intervene as a minor and subsequent movement. There you are. Result. It's a result. It's not original. Partial and relative. Is it then something inherent in the multiplicity of souls? Does it come into being immediately Brahman views himself in the multiplicity? And does that multiplicity consist of a sum of souls, each in its very nature fractional and divided from all others in consciousness, unable to become aware of them at all, except as things external to it, linked at most by communication from body to body or mind to mind, but incapable of unity? He is asking questions. But we have seen that this is only what we seem to be in our most superficial layer of consciousness, the external mind and the physical. When we get back into a subtler, deeper, larger action of our consciousness, we find the walls of division becoming thinner, and in the end, there is left no wall of division, no ignorance. Clear? So, I'll read the summary of this last one.
Good.
Okay, so what we have seen, there are immediate important consequences. The starting point of ignorance is the dividing action of the mind. The supermind, there is no dividing action. In the overmind, the one is beginning to become the many. The sea, static condition of the sea, is beginning to make waves. The multiplicity is starting there. Okay? The dividing action of the mind. This point is neither in the integral Brahman nor in Satchidananda. In the supermind, there is no division at all. Okay, so the point is neither in the integral Brahman nor in the Satchidananda. it has its origin in the partial action of the being with which the individual identifies himself. He identifies himself either with the body life mind, in which case there is ignorance of the self, the one, or he identifies himself with the self, in which case he is ignorance of the multiplicity, the activity. So, the journey from up, no ignorance, comes down, you are seeing the static condition, but you don't see the activity. You come down here, you see the activity, you don't see the condition. So, ignorance is a result. It is not original. There is no ignorance in the divine. Just like darkness. There is no darkness which exists by itself. It's a contingent reality. It's a conditional reality. Ignorance also is a conditional reality. Okay, so therefore, we can conclude that there is no self-existing, primal, independent ignorance. It is a result of a work in process, like sleep and waking. When in one state, the other is unreal, and vice versa. So, in other words, ignorance is not a permanent, primal reality. Darkness is not a primal reality. It's a contingent reality. That's what he's saying.
Thank you, Ron. Yes, we'll stop here. It's a few minutes to 6. Namaste all. And we will meet again on Monday. We are on page 599, and we'll begin with the second paragraph. Body is the outward sign and lowest basis of the apparent division which nature, plunging into ignorance and self-nescience, makes the starting point for the recovery of unity by the individual soul.